Namaste and good morning. It is great to see you all here assembled in Pilkara as our new talented and energetic 2014 U.S. Embassy Youth Council. Thank you to you all, and especially to Kendra KC for putting this conference together. I want to begin my talk by congratulating you all on your selection as Youth Council members. This year, we made the application process very challenging, and despite that, we had over 400 people apply. So we have about 50 other members. That's a very competitive process. And the fact that Susan tells me you also had to write an essay this year, and the fact that people are willing to sit down, either as busy entrepreneurs or students, graduate students, and take the time to write an essay to join a volunteer organization says something about your commitment. Now, why were you selected? It's a very, very big secret, but I'll tell you. You were selected because you represent the best and brightest from all across Nepal. Now, that sounds great. It's something you can write down and say to Ambassador Bodde says I'm the best and brightest. You can tweet your mother and say, but when you're the best and brightest, there are also a couple other things that come with it. And the entrepreneurs in the audience already know this, and that's called responsibility and accountability. Because when you're the best and brightest, you see things and you don't accept things for the way they are. You walk into a situation and go, this works pretty well, but if I did this and they did that, and they did this, I can make it a whole lot better. Susan's gift, she's one of these people who can take a group of people, young people like you, and create this magic by bringing you all together to make the Nepal a better place. And that's why you were selected. I also want to talk about why we put such an emphasis on working with youth. And I also want to offer you some suggestions for you to think about as the Council takes up its work for this coming year. So why youth? Well, I've been in the business of diplomacy for a very long time, 35 years. I don't think any of you are 35 years old. And it used to be that diplomats like myself, ambassadors, senior leaders, we spent all of our time, talking to senior people, that means people my age, in government and in academia, in the media, and in business. And these would be very influential people, and they get a lot done. But something happened in the last few years around the world. And Nepal is just a perfect example of this, but it's a trend that we've seen in country after country after country. While we are experienced, while we run things, we manage countries and businesses and everything else, we don't constitute the majority of the citizens anymore. In Nepal, 65% of the population is under 30. That's why we talk to youth. It's taken us a long time to figure this out, but what we learned is, as wise as we like to think we are, there's an awful lot we can learn from you. But, I want to be very, very clear about this, believe it or not, there's an awful lot you can learn from us. And the reason I spend a lot of time, and I think I can say this honestly, is every time Susan asks me to speak to young people, I always say yes. I stop what I'm doing and do it. And the reason is I want you to have the benefit of my experience. I've done a lot of things. I've been very lucky. I've been an ambassador 3 times now. I've been very lucky. I've come to Nepal 3 times. But in doing that, and being successful, I also had to learn. And how do you learn? You learn by making mistakes. And what I want to do is share my experiences so when you go forward and learn, you know what you're going to do? You're going to make different mistakes. But you won't make the same mistakes I did. We also wanted to do something where our focus is we do a lot of cultural exchange programs. We send very prominent people to the States. But we wanted to put a special focus on this is to reach out more to young people. And that's why we created the Youth Council. Sending somebody in their 40s and 50s is a very good thing, but they're already in their 40s and 50s. They've shaped their opinions about the world, about how things work. What we want to do is use the Youth Council as basically a very simple tool, and that's opening windows for you. So you learn something about the United States, which is we think is important. But the main thing you're going to get out of the Youth Council is you're going to learn something about each other. Carolyn is one of our coordinators, and she'll be working with you very closely this year. She does some very important things, like she handles my Twitter account. Very important. Somebody had told me 2 years ago I would be having somebody who just worried about things I tweet. I said, what? Well, it's a very important thing. It gets the word out. It's how we reach people like you. So, when we work with Carolyn, we were talking just as we came in here, we were saying, how many of you know each other already? And we didn't know how many of you had worked together or been in fellow NGOs. So, before today, how many of you knew each other before? Can you raise your hand if you knew somebody in the room before? Remember the Youth Council before you joined? So you had worked together and you knew each other. That's good. But what's even better is that most of you didn't know each other. Because the real thing we're trying to do with the Youth Council, and the reason we switch it out every year and put 50 new people on board, is to give you something called a network. Now, we've heard from colleagues who develop software who already have a network in Malawi and elsewhere. We've heard from a number of you in the media side. But what it's all about, and what I've learned, is when you go to a conference like this, it's nice to hear what somebody like me has to say, or your speakers say, or even the movie star I had to follow. But the real value you're going to get out of this conference 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now is you're going to have a network of 50 people who went through a shared experience and spent a lot of time talking about how are we going to make Nepal better. We're not going to wait for the old people to do it. We're going to do it. How are we going to do it? And when you have a problem, you're going to go, gee, what do I do? Well, you know what I do when I have a problem? I network. I get on the email, call up my friends and colleagues like Susan and say, I don't know quite what to do. She goes, well, I had a problem like that once. Have you thought about doing this? Or she comes to me with a similar needs ambassador, trying to do this. How would you do this? But this concept of networking, that's another reason we did this, because it's really, really important. Now, we've done things officially, and I won't get into a lot of that in the speech, but we have a Secretary Clinton, when she was secretary, appointed a global youth coordinator. We've continued those things. And I just was back in Washington. And last week, we had a worldwide conference of all the American ambassadors from the entire world. About 185 of us were at the conference. Spent a lot of time with Secretary Kerry. And we talked about a couple concepts that I want to share with you today. Because again, it gets back to what we're talking about here. The first one is we're putting a really, really hard and definitive effort on a concept we call shared prosperity. Now, you all know the United States is a very prosperous country. Despite any economic problems or anything else, it's still a very prosperous country. What we want to do is we want to share that prosperity. We want to share the tools, we want to share the experience of entrepreneurship that make us such a successful and prosperous country. So we're going to be putting a lot of focus on that. The other thing we spent time talking about as ambassadors is how do we reach out to youth? I was very proud that we have a youth council here, and I think we're one of the first embassies to do that. And we have probably 4 or 5 other programs that reach out to youth. So we're going to be doing that as well. A couple things I do want to talk about though. Susan and I, we were lucky. We inherited, the youth council was already in place. And we were able to take a good idea and make it better, which is always much easier than starting fresh. But when we got here, there was a lot of discussion, and the Youth Council would get together and debate things and talk about things. That's very, very important. But we think it's also important that we leave you with some basic skills. What we also want to do is talk about, and we've done this with the group that just left, how to fill out a job application. What do I look for when I look and I get Susan or our HR person that comes in and says, Ambassador, position you wanted to hire, we've screened the applications. Here's the top 10. What am I looking for in that application? What sets somebody apart from somebody else? What do you say in a job interview? Everybody always tells you should do this, you should do that, but nobody ever sits you down and does a practice job interview. We're going to be doing things like that. Many of you are entrepreneurs. How do you make your pitch? Probably we can learn more from you than we can teach you, but it's important, and that's something that you can give to the rest of the group. And that's really, really important. But we are totally open to any ideas you may have. And if you have things you want to do with the council this time, talk to us. The worst we can say is we tried that last year, it didn't work, but maybe we can try it again. But please, the worst thing you can do is have an idea and not raise it. If you do that, you're only hurting yourselves, you're hurting the other 50 people in the group, and we're not taking advantage of the opportunity of having the best and brightest in Nepal give us their ideas. So we really are flexible, and if there's other things you want to do. We're starting a series of lunches. I'm a Rotarian. I've been very active in Rotary since the mid-90s here in Nepal. And I realized I meet with a lot of young people. Yesterday I spoke to the South Asian Management Institute in Kathmandu. Spent an hour talking about entrepreneurship. They're very interested. But at the end of the day, I'm a bureaucrat. I'm not an entrepreneur. I have some ideas, I've read a lot about it. But I realized if I'm going to be helpful to you, the best thing I can do is give you access to many of my friends and contacts. Give you access to very senior Nepalis in the private sector who've already made millions of dollars, who already have broken all the barriers. And what we're going to be doing is a series of lunch. Starting at my house, we go to a restaurant sometimes, where we're going to bring in senior Nepali, and by senior I mean experienced, older businessmen, and they're going to have a chance, you're going to have a chance to have lunch in groups, probably of 3 or 4 of you and 2 or 3 of them, to have an hour and a half of their time. And I know Nepali society pretty well. That never happens, but they're really excited because they want to meet you. And I'm really excited because I think that's the best we can do is build that network. Now, one of the things a couple people touched on, and I'm really glad you did this, is you talked about the need for the role entrepreneurship plays in democracy. You talked about the role journalism and activism plays and student activism. I think it's great that we have engineering students that are politically active. When I was in university, those of us who were in the liberal arts were politically active, and those of us who were engineers were not politically active at all. But it's very important that you are like that. But I think it's very important, what we're really looking at is how do we capture this stuff. Now, one of my concerns as an old friend of Nepal's is I was here when democracy was restored the second time in the 90s. And I've come back, and Nepal has been through a terrible insurgency. 16,000 people lost their lives. But you've come a very long way. You've had about 1,500 of the former combatants have been integrated into the army. You just had a free and fair, credible, and inclusive election with a 79% voter turnout, which is unbelievable when you look at where Nepal was a few years ago. But what we want to do, and I think everybody wants this who believes in democracy, is to see this process institutionalized. To see that the democratic institutions and processes here are so robust that they continue on, elections don't get delayed, things happen. But we can't do that, and that's not our role. You know whose role it is? It's your role. It's the youth of Nepal. It's the ones who care about their country. Now I'm going to say something that 10 years ago, people your age would have found corny or funny. But you also are here for another reason, and I don't think many of you have thought about that. You're here because you're patriotic. You're here because you care about Nepal and you care about your country. And that's a very good thing. So think about that, and think about how you share that. One of the best things I've seen since I've come back to Nepal this time, which you never saw in the 90s, is you see a lot of young people promoting Nepal. They sing songs about Nepal. They proudly wave the Nepali flag. There's a real sense of country now, and I think that's a good thing. And again, we want to encourage you to do that for your country. We're going to expose you to our country, but that's for your country. We want you to think about what your priorities are. Now, last year, the Youth Council established some exciting civic engagement projects. They took positive steps. They were proactive in their communities to help other people. You already, all of you do that. That's why you're here. You heard many of you speak already. But think about some things out of the box. Think about some things that haven't been done. One of the things I'm constantly challenging my staff at the embassy is everybody talks about bringing manufacturing to Nepal. Bring jobs, bring companies that make things. Well, when I look at modern societies today, many of them have already made the switch to knowledge-based economies. When I hear what some of you are doing, creating software companies, exporting ideas, I happen to think that's Nepal's future. And how do we create opportunities for those 65% of the citizens that are under 30, that, because quite frankly, they're as competitive, they're as smart, they're as good as anybody, anyplace else. And we have to take advantage of that. And our job is to enable you to take advantage of your natural skills. The other thing I implore you, and I do this with every youth group I speak to, is it's very easy to be cynical. Some terrible things happen in life. When you get to be my age, it's normal for people to become more cynical. When you're young like Susan, you're a little, yes, less cynical than I am. But at your age, none of you should be cynical. It's really easy to see the political situation here sometimes and go, okay, Garnet, when you're running a software company and the computer crashes because the power went off, it's very easy to be cynical. But you shouldn't do that. Don't fall into what I call the Keynote trap. What you should always be doing is looking for solutions. If the power goes off, it's up to you to find a solution. If the power goes off, it's up to you to go yell at the electricity company about why this is going on, and the local leaders about why this is going on. Don't get cynical. Always be positive. Always look for solutions. The other thing that will happen, and this happened with the Youth Council, the first, I guess we've done with two since I've been here.
Third one, yeah.
It's the third one. So at some point, everybody says, well, Ambassador, that's very nice. But what are you going to do to find me a job? Well, I have to tell you a secret. I can't find you a job. What I can do is give you the benefit of my experience, Susan's experience. I can give you a skill set that's going to make you more employable than the other people. But ultimately, one of the things that you learn in life when you get old and gray like me is most solutions you have to find yourself. Now, we can help you, we can give you some tools, but you have to do that. The other thing we found is that in the modern world today, is that in addition to learning your trade, learning your profession, learning other skills, one of the skills that we want to help people on the Youth Council with is English. Because we think English is really the international business language. And I think that's a tremendous advantage Nepal has for many of the young, because so many of you speak English well. But I think there's always more we can do, particularly with professional business English. Susan and I have been struggling with this because we haven't quite found the right fix, the model, how we're going to do that. If any of you have any ideas, fine. I don't mean bringing people into class when some grumpy old person like me sits on a blackboard and says, here's the grammar and the sentence structure. What we're talking about is exposure to business English, exposure to lectures. The other thing we're very interested in doing, which Susan forced 10 of you to do already, is how do you make your pitch? How do you get up and be comfortable talking into an audience of people you've never met before? In every job, all of you are going to do, you have to be able to be comfortable to come up here and talk. You have to be able to be confident enough in your material that you can talk wisely about it. You also have to be comfortable enough to talk not quickly, but succinctly. By that I mean, don't talk too long. That's also a hazard. And when people sometimes don't know their material, they go on for a longer and longer time. I saw a quote that actually Secretary Kerry was talking about. He says a lot. I want you to think about this. It's a very wise quote. And our Thomas Jefferson, our third president, said this to John Adams. He said, "Sir, if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter." The whole goal is that you're on the Youth Council for a year, but we want your engagement with our embassy and with the United States and with Americans to go for the rest of your life. So although you're probably wondering, why is he saying this on the first meeting? We're also doing a very proactive effort now to reach out to our alumni. And over the years, believe it or not, here in Nepal, through university education, through the Fulbright program, through the Humphrey program, through the International Visitors Program, through other very specific job training, we've probably trained somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 Nepalis. What we want to do is when we do these things, we want to stay in touch. Because what we want is, it's important that we're in touch with you, but what's most important is that you're in touch with each other. And that's what we really want. So I said a good speaker stops when he knows he's said everything he should say. I again want to thank Susan for having me be the last speaker before lunch and following when you start. And I'd like to take questions. Now, I have a very simple rule, and I do this everywhere I go across the country. If you don't ask me questions, I ask you questions. Thank you.